most fundamental concept of elections is that elections should be transparent, inclusive, and accountable. I didn't pick those words out of the air. Those are the words that the United States government, through its U.S. Aid Department, that's what we preach to developing countries around the world as to how their elections ought to be administered. Transparent, inclusive, and accountable. Only 20% of the public says that it's very confident in the country's elections. That's January of this year. It's one thing I guess Republicans and Democrats can agree on, right? Many, many polls indicate that our fellow citizens have significant doubt. We had the specter of private, dark money, unaccountable to anyone, coming in and taking an active role in the actual administrative process of our public elections, something that is unprecedented, as far as I know, in the history of this state. This headline illustrates how private money from Facebook CEO saved the 2020 election. Mark Zuckerberg bought the 2020 election for Biden with staggering funding, new analyses suggest. How Zuckerberg helped Dems sway the 2020 election. Recent poll, 56% of all United States citizens believe Joe Biden's victory was influenced by cheating. You bet he came to town with money. Mr. Zuckerberg came with about $330 million, a little more, for CTCL, the Center for Tech and Civic Life. CTCL is a Chicago corporation, started, funded, their previous budgets have been a little over $1 million a year. Mr. Zuckerberg bumped that up considerably. They suddenly had $330 million to spread around. And CTCL was founded and is in fact run by former employees and political operatives of former President Obama. CTCL came to Wisconsin and they called it a grant. They called it a grant, but they did not put applications out to everyone in this state. Unlike the practice that WEC itself followed when WEC was distributing federal CARES Act money, CTCL picked their own people. To call them grants, I think, is a little disingenuous, because grants, if I grant you something, I give it to you. These were not gifts. These were contracts obligating the 5 cities to follow the directions of the CTCL funded by Mark Zuckerberg. So the cities did not become the owners of that money. I believe to a large extent they became the employees or the agents of CTCL funded by Mr. Zuckerberg. There was no transparency or public input when the Zuckerberg 5 mayors and the clerks applied and received the grants. The 5, as we've talked about in previous meetings, the 5 largest recipients were the 5 largest Democratic-controlled cities in the state. As I mentioned, this is in contrast to the policy and practices of WEC, where WEC made the CARES Act subgrants. They became subgrants because the feds granted the money to WEC, and WEC was to distribute in subgrants. And they put out memoranda to all Wisconsin jurisdictions. Everybody was invited to apply for the CARES Act money. The stated purpose of the CTCL grant was COVID safety. That was the stated purpose. But we see, as far as we know, less than 1% of the money was ultimately spent on protective materials for COVID. So what did CTCL, what were they able to get for their money? They were able to get access to voter data information. More to the point, they were able to get access to the information along very clear demographic lines, and especially targeting African Americans. And they kept track of which people of color had requested absentee ballots and which had returned them. And they got that information. They didn't have to pay. We have no records of them paying $12,500 per day. We in fact have the opposite. We have records of the CTCL operatives and their so-called partners, who were other private interest groups, getting access to information that would cost anyone in this room $12,500 a day. They were getting it every day on a no-cost basis when nobody else could get that information fresh. Why is that important? Why is that? It was important for a get out the vote. It was important for a get out the vote effort. The young woman on the right is Tiana Epps Johnson, the director of Center for Tech and Civic Life. Approximately a month after she left her Obama program fellowship, she was awarding grants to the 5 largest cities in our state. Her whole purpose was to get out the vote. There's no record of any kind of medical personnel or scientific staff being part of CTCL. You know, people who might be able to advise about COVID safety. A get out the vote operation. She interned at the Young Democrats of America, and from 2010 to 2015, she was the director of election administration for an entity called the New Organizing Institute, which according to Capital Research Center had one job, and that was to elect Democrats.